Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast. I'm Gavin Schall. Today I'm joined by John Jablonka, who covers the Miami Heat for the Miami Heat Beat and does a great job of it. We are going to talk about the Knicks season so far, the Heat season so far, and preview today's matchup between the two teams. All that and more right now on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, and today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. And I wanted to thank you for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day, because we're now available on all platforms. So be sure to check us out on YouTube. Hit that notifications bell, hit that subscription button, because you will make my holiday season if you do so. And be sure to follow along on the podcast side of things as well, and check out episodes each and every day of Locked On Knicks. And then if you want to take things the next step further, you can subscribe to our Subtext, where you will get thoughts from Alex and I before and after every single Knicks game, and you can ask us any question you want on the team. But who's talking to you? I'm Gavin Schall, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster. Just a little programming note for you guys if you missed it. I put out a Thanksgiving episode last night on everything I'm thankful for on the New York Knicks. Apologies for not getting that one out earlier. I was having a little bit of a rough few days, but it meant a lot to me to record, and certainly cheered me up and made my Thanksgiving. So would love for you to give that a listen if you haven't already, but certainly listen to this one first, because it's a really good conversation with John Jablonka, catching up on the Heat season and for what I think is going to be a pretty pivotal game between the two teams. So without further ado, let's get into it, John, right now on Locked On Knicks. All right, guys, all the way from the UK, it is, as promised, John Jablonka, who covers the Miami Heat for Miami Heat Beat. John, I first became aware of your work during the playoffs last year, and I was like, wow, this guy is just fantastic at what he does. I learned so much about the Heat, and I kind of had it bookmarked. I wanted to talk to you at some point, and with the teams playing, thought it was the perfect opportunity. So thank you so much for coming on.
I appreciate those words. Yeah, it was a fun series. It was fun covering the Knicks. It's fun seeing Jaylen Brown cook. And it was even more fun seeing Randall struggle as well. So
oh no, it was all positive until that. But yeah, it wasn't as fun for us. But I can't argue the characterization of how he played. Let's start off with that series from last year, coming out of it, and then I don't know how much of the Knicks you've gotten to see this year, but any of the Knicks you've seen this year, what was your impression of the team at that point, and then through now?
Last year, I'm gonna be honest, I wasn't scared of the Knicks in the series, because then the Knicks, they had a reputation of being the Knicks, and you also have Randall having his reputation in 2021 as well. I like Brunson. I wanted the Heat to get Brunson, but that was his first year as a lead ball handler on a playoff team, and with us being more experienced team, with Spoelstra being the elite coach as well, I wasn't that worried about the series. But I actually liked the Knicks throughout the season. I was low on them the previous year, but now, looking ahead of this year, I thought they could be a fourth seed as well this year.
How would you? I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase it, but I'm just going to be direct about it as possible. All right. So presumably Boston, despite Miami's success against them in the playoffs, number one on this list, and there's no one else really in the conversation. I would assume the Bucks are probably second after acquiring Damian Lillard, despite the shaky start to the year. But those two possibly aside, or I don't know, maybe you want to surprise me and have the Knicks second on that list. How would you rank the Knicks amongst threats to take away the Heat's defending Eastern Conference crown? And I say that very explicitly because I think it's weirdly, we all suffer collective amnesia and forget about them every single year. Despite what Boston's done, despite what Milwaukee's done this offseason, despite how well Philly's playing to start the year, the Miami Heat are still the defending Eastern Conference champs. So it goes through them, as much as it makes me want to throw up in my mouth to say that, John. But how big of a threat are the Knicks in your mind relative to those other teams and even the ones I didn't mention?
I think you clearly have Boston and the Bucks in their own tier. Boston have, the same as Heat, we've been to Eastern Conference Finals 3 or 4 times. The Bucks have the best player in the Eastern Conference. Now they added another top 10 caliber player. I think that those two easily separate, so in a separate tier. Philly's a weird one. So I wasn't sure what was going to happen with Harden. I definitely wasn't expecting a maxi leap like that. But I think then you just have Philly, Cleveland, Knicks all in the same tier. I don't think either one of them has shown that they're ahead of everyone. Even the Heat. I don't think the Heat are above a tier than the Knicks or the Cleveland or Philly. I think they're just all in that 3 to 4, 3 to 5 matchup that could just all have a competitive series.
I think I've been watching, and I'm sure this is something you've done your whole time covering the Heat. I'm kind of watching the Knicks through a new lens this year, because last year it wasn't even like on my mind to think, all right, how does this team look as a playoff contender? Because especially, I mean, at the same point in the season last year, the Knicks were in a really bad place. A lot of people thought Tom Thibodeau was potentially going to get fired. Some people, me, were advocating for him to get fired, John. And then they turned it around, and you kind of got to start to have those conversations at the end of last year of, all right, what exactly is this Knicks team going to be? How does this translate to the postseason? But even that felt like a step forward. And going into that Cleveland series last year, I was very cautious in talking about it. I thought the Knicks were really tough. I thought Jalen Brunson was awesome. Beyond that, especially with knowing that Julius Randle was going to be at less than 100%, I didn't want to set expectations too high. Every time I went on somewhere before that Cavs series, I was predicting Cleveland to win. I can't remember. I probably picked the Knicks against Miami because I got very, very high on my own supply at that point. But I say all that to say it's been a long time, certainly since before I started doing this podcast 5 years ago, that I've got to watch a Knicks regular season through the frame of how does this team translate to being a postseason contender. I'm curious as an outsider who's maybe just dipping a toe in some of the Knicks games, some of the Celtics games, some of the Bucks games, some of the Cavs games. What do you think? And got to see all the Knicks' faults on display last year. There were many of them in that series. What do you think the Knicks have to focus on and improve on to not just be more of a threat to the Heat, but I guess be more matchup proof in the playoffs this postseason? Because you circle back to that Cavs season, it's kind of easy to see now, like the Knicks were awesome in that series, and it was also kind of the perfect matchup for them, and both things can be true. And then when it wasn't the perfect matchup for them against Miami, some issues started to come up.
When I was just like looking at the stats and then watching the games from last year in the playoffs, I think just the offense. They've been an elite an offensive team in the regular season, but then that just went away in the playoffs. Like that was just a typical 90s basketball against the Heat, like low 90s scores, grinding out in the mud. I don't see that improvement like this. I don't know if they changed it this year. I think it's just the style of play. How I remember it was just Jaylen Brunson taking turns, Randle taking turns. And if isolation basketball, I'm not a fan of that. And I think you touched on like the Tibbs potentially being fired. I also think that was in the off season that could have been something to consider as well. Like some teams have the ceiling, did like reach with their coach. The Warriors, I think, was a good example with Mark Jackson. They did as well as they could, and then change of coach, that probably pushed them up further. I think there are other teams that have done so. That's not, I think, a bad thing for Tibbs. I just think the scheme around the Knicks should like be changed to push them even further.
Yeah, I think, look, when Tom Thibodeau was hired, that was exactly the analogy I made. I said, I think my best hope for him is that he can be the Mark Jackson to someone Steve Kerr. And I would argue he's maybe, even if I have a lot of issues schematically, and I like you, I would hope in some ways the offense would be more sophisticated. I think it's hard to argue, even looking back at last year. You look at the talent on the Knicks roster, you look at the fact that Randle was clearly hobbled, that Emmanuel Quickley, who was easily their third best player last year, essentially missed that entire series. Like getting to game 6 and getting within maybe a shot of forcing a game 7 at home against a team that eventually won the Eastern Conference. Like that was probably the ceiling of that team. And there were all these specific frustrations, like the fact that they were so clearly better with Quentin Grimes on the court, and they so desperately, even though he sucked in that series offensively, they just so clearly needed someone else who he thought could theoretically make a three-pointer to open things up for Jalen Brunson a little bit more. And Tibbs just didn't see that until game 5. And yet they got about as far as their talent said they should have gotten. And that's because Tibbs, to your point, like he somehow manufactured offense that was tied for fourth in the NBA with talent that had no business doing that, off of committing no turnovers and dominating the offensive glass. And I think what has me encouraged this year is that the base formula is similar, but it feels like there's a higher postseason ceiling because clearly, especially against a team led by Bam Adebayo, that rebounding didn't translate to that series. And I think that is what killed the Knicks. Like that offensive rebounding wasn't the same. They were a little bit more turnover prone. And it feels like this year they just have more options in their bag with Jalen Brunson turning into one of the best high volume three-point shooters in basketball, hitting like close to 48% so far this year. And who knows how that sustains. But if he can shoot what he shot last year on volume, that opens things up for the Knicks. Dante DiVincenzo adding some verve in off the bench. And they're clearly a much better passing team this year. And my only question is how much of that goes away when you have defenses that are more locked in, longer and better, because we've seen them struggle against the Timberwolves and against the Boston Celtics. And I think it's so fascinating, John. I want to hear your comments on this to contrast that with a team like the Heat, where it feels like everything they do in the regular season translates. And sometimes it, like, I don't even know what the word, like sometimes it exceeds, right? It doesn't even translate. It gets better in the postseason. And for the Knicks, like that happened with their defense, but offensively, they totally fell off a cliff. And it's so interesting with Miami, where it's like they save stuff. And while Tibbs maxes out in the regular season, Spoelstra almost intentionally doesn't let that happen. All right, guys, I want to get into the Heat's recent stretch of winning and how it mirrors the Knicks and what's been clicking for them and how the Knicks can potentially counteract it. But before we do that, I wanted to tell you about our good buddies over at Gametime. If you want to get tickets for tonight's game, they are the place to do it. They take the guesswork out of buying tickets, and they're the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. They're the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. Why do I say that? You can see the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. And all-in prices show your total up front, so you know you're getting a great deal without hidden fees. You can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. That is my biggest pet peeve. One, when I don't know exactly what I'm getting, and I'm just like, oh, that's a great price, and then it ends up being $18 more. And also when it takes an hour to get tickets, when maybe 20 minutes before the game, I just decide on a whim, I want to go. The other thing that makes Gametime so great is the Gametime guarantee. That means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. When I am in Phoenix next month and I attend Suns Knicks, I will certainly be using Gametime for that very reason. I'll be scouring all the other apps and ensuring I get the best deal possible. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
I think I think it just starts with Butler. You can see how the offense runs throughout the regular season. I'm sure you follow Cooper Moorhead. He follows the Heat, covers the Heat. There was this theory that last year Spo really experimented throughout the regular season that may not have had big success, like Hero run more plays, Bam increasing his isolation. But all of that would help translate into the playoffs. So when you now have Butler being an actual first option with the ball in his hands, you have everything else maximized with him because of the improvements throughout the regular season where it didn't translate into wins, but it just translated into growth from players. So now you have Butler stepping up. You have the three-point shooting luck as well, because that was that three-point switch from the regular season to playoffs was just wild. So I think that's what I like about Spo. He just experiments with different stuff and then just maximizes what works in the playoffs. I just wanted to touch on some of the Knicks stuff I saw, because you said about the defense and the offense. Yeah. Last year, I'm just looking at the relative to league average. Sure. They were 3 points better than average on offense last year, but I know they're almost 4 points better on defense. So are they a defensive team now, or are they still an offensive team? Because it doesn't look like the whole same team.
The hope is both. And going into that Timberwolves game, I think they were one of 4 teams in the NBA top 10 in offensive rating. top 10 in defensive rating, which, and I always, this is always an oversimplification. And I always think there should be a premium placed on being elite in one of them, and more preferably offense in terms of the underlying metrics you're looking at in terms of like gauging championship contenders. But they were top 10 in both, and there were only 4 teams in the NBA that could say. I think it was the Knicks, the Timberwolves, the Celtics, and the Thunder were the 4 teams. And now they're probably out of that, but they're certainly better on defense this year, and it's hard to pinpoint exactly what that is. I think the clearest thing I see is like their 2 weakest points last year, which were Jalen Brunson and RJ Barrett, are playing much closer to average defense, and RJ might even be on the higher end of that, and might be hitting average to like slightly above average defense, while Brunson, it went from just terrible and like maybe just a tier above someone like Trae Young to just being kind of normal bad on that end. And it's one of those things where it has nothing to do with his effort, with his focus. Like he's leading the NBA in charges taken right now. It's just simply a size issue for him. But I think shoring that up, and the fact that Mitchell Robinson, who I would argue probably should have been more so in the conversation for all defensive team type stuff last year, obviously just so hard to make as a center, he's taken even another step forward. So if you're looking at the Knicks defense, that's where things have gotten a little bit better. On the flip side, the Miami Heat, it was a little bit of a shaky start to this year. Obviously, I think just 1-4 at the beginning of the season. They've since rebounded to win 8 of 9. It's very similar to last year, where you look at their point margin, and it's still like it's barely over. It's like barely over 0 again, and yet they pull out all these games. What's clicked for them over this winning stretch?
Don't mean to be down on the Heat, but I think strength of opponent helped. Playing the Wizards helped. Playing the Hornets helped. Playing the Spurs helped. I can't remember who else it was, but I think most importantly, the first 5 games, it was Butler not playing good basketball. He was objectively bad, not trying. It was literally Hero and Bam leading the team in usage, with Butler just taking a back step. Then Hero went down with the injury, so that flipped. It became a more Butler-oriented offense, and that's when they just picked up steam. And I think more importantly, you had Duncan Robinson picking up steam as well. Him and Jaime Jaquez Jr. But I think those 2 plus Butler stepping up again, that sparked that 8 wins in 9 games.
I have to ask, and I hate to ask, because this feels like a cheap shot at a guy that Knicks fans despise because of the comparisons to RJ Barrett and all the trash talk we heard about him being better than RJ, and he statistically still is. But Tyler Hero, who, and I know this because he's on my fantasy basketball team, got off to, again, statistically, an awesome start this year. And then he goes down, and all of a sudden the Heat are amazing. And I know you know this, John, and I know any Heat fans listening know this, but as a reminder to Knicks fans, he went down the playoffs last year, and then all of a sudden the Heat are amazing. Is this a correlation equals causation? Is it the opposite of that? Is Tyler Hero, there's a better way to phrase this. Are the Miami Heat just better without Tyler Hero against some form of logic for those of us who just box score watch?
That was actually something that came up again with the Heat stuff. That comes up every year. It's been like 3 years now where the question is, are they really better than about him? I don't think they're better. I just think that they play differently. With Hero, it started when Hero became a starter. That you could see the differences how they play when he became a more primarily ball handler, more high usage guy. A team with when he's in a high usage situation, I don't think that's the right role for him, and I don't think that's what fits better with Bam and what fits with Butler. But then when you substitute that with Duncan Robinson, who doesn't need the ball ever, he just runs around, he has that gravity as a 3-point shooter, it adds more ball movement to the offense. I was looking at the tracking stats with their touches, average dribble. There's a big difference in how the Heat play. Even Butler, who's a more ball dominant player, he still doesn't dribble as much as Hero. So the ball doesn't stick as much. They pass more. There's more cutting, more movement, more 3-point shooting. I think that's why the offense looks better. Because when you have Hero running the show, which again goes back to the theory where Spo puts them in those situations where they're not ready and they might have bad results, but it helps them develop, but it still looks bad. It may end up being good for them in the long term, but it still would look bad in comparison to like the more ball movement style offense. But he's still a talented player. I think he's a top 10 shooter as well. Some of the criticism he gets are also over-exaggerated. I keep seeing he's a liability on defense. I think that's a big growth he made this year. Except like the conversation around hero just depends on what role he's in. If he's putting a ball handler, that's not good. But if he's closer to Klay Thompson, I think it was Zach Lowe that also said,
yeah,
if he plays like Klay Thompson, you will have an elite option in the hero. If he plays more like Devin Booker, not so great. And that's why you see the big difference in how the team's looking.
It reminds me of the conversation of Jaylen Brown so much, and I think you nailed it. So context dependent. I really liked the decision a few years ago when they moved him to sixth man and he won sixth man of the year. But I also think, again, like if he was willing to be an elevated Duncan Robinson, like that's the best case. Because we saw it in that Knicks Heat series. Like Duncan Robinson, man, he tortured the Knicks in that series. And it's not even like he had one game where he hit 7 threes, but just how much attention they had to pay to him and like how that opened up things for Bam and Butler and his ability to like beat hard closeouts and get to the rim. And I think this is something I'd want to see this year. And it's a little bit concerning to me that the Knicks aren't trying to develop this in the regular season. Like if they matched up again, I kind of want the Knicks to do what some teams have done with a Duncan Robinson and say, all right, and like, again, he's similar to Hero where like maybe his reputation is worse than reality on defense, but like someone like Quentin Grimes should be able to go at him. But if you're the Knicks and someone like Grimes never gets reps in the regular season going one-on-one, it's so hard to pivot in the playoffs and say, all right, for the first time in your career, like we're going to throw you the ball and you have to attack someone off the dribble because he's essentially never ever done that in the NBA. Maybe Dante DiVincenzo would be a little bit more confident doing that. But that's like, if I'm looking at a weak point for the Knicks in that series, like I don't think they have the ability to necessarily punish that matchup. And of course you can play the pick game, you can play the matchup game, and you can try to get Duncan on Jalen Brunson, which the Knicks did, and Miami's very good at avoiding that. But the Heat and maybe I'm curious your take on this. Maybe it is just the fact that they're so like on a string defensively and their help is amazing and Bam can guard multiple people at the same time. But it seems like even when they play relatively poor defenders, it's very, very difficult to matchup hunt them in the way some other teams get matchup hunted in the playoffs. Alrighty, guys, we are going to be back with John one final time, telling you the keys to Knicks Heat and some under the radar things he's found cool about this Miami Heat season. And we're going to talk about, again, some of the ways that the Knicks can overcome issues they had in the playoffs last year against the Heat. But before we do that, I want to remind you to score early this NBA season and about halfway through this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. I'm going to repeat that because it's an absolutely insane offer. That's $150 on just a $5 money line bet if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over, unders, and more. I'm looking at that Knicks Heat line. The Knicks are 5.5-point favorites tonight. I know I told you to take the Knicks, and I kind of backfired against the Minnesota Timberwolves, so I'm going to go the other way this time. I know it hurts my soul too, but I'm going to tell you to take the Miami Heat because I think it's a close game. Whoever wins is going to be within a point or two. Hopefully the Knicks are on the right side of that. I just think 5.5 is a little bit too big of a number. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NBA season and continue joining the NFL season because FanDuel is an official partner of the NFL.
Yeah, like I always tweet to support my Bam agenda case. He's played with, I don't think he's ever played with an average, like a backcourt on defense. You always have a old Goran Dragic and an old Kyle Lowry, Duncan Hero, who were rookies, and Kendrick Nunn, who was undersized, and yet they never had a bad defense. I think most of that is scheme, like you said about Duncan's limitation on defense. He's improved as a one-on-one defender, but that's still not his strength. But he's a smart team defender. He's always in the right place. Same with Hero. And then you also have Butler and Bam just helping up on the other side. Butler's a great off-ball player as well. So they always are able to just cut off any drives, overhelp, recover as well. So even if you do have a mismatch on the court, everyone else is still able to load up and recover without any mistakes.
It's a testament to him, and I know the consensus out of Miami this year and from national media is that Bam is having a career start to this year, and he even looks like at somehow, even though it feels like he's been around for a million years, only 26 years old, it feels like he's made another leap. What have you seen from him and how he's helped push forward this stretch of great play for Miami?
He's been more aggressive on. There's always been a conversation around him going back to the 2021 Bucks series where he wasn't looking at the hoop at all. So the conversation was always he needs to be more aggressive. He needs to look for his own shots. Now he's averaging career high again. He averages a career high in points every single season. He's looking more comfortable and confident going for those shots. I think it's also I saw a stat he's top 10 in isolation points per possession. He's definitely increases the usage in like the post ups and isolations, and he just goes for it. He's there's a thing on Heat where I hate on his mid-range jumpers because he takes a lot of them. But then again, I say theory with the Heat where he takes those mid-range jumpers more in regular season to be ready in the playoffs. But they're still annoying sometimes. But that still shows growth in how in his range. Like he wasn't a mid-range shooter. That was his weakness in a bubble. He had those hot and cold starts. But now he's a legit shooter in the paint. He's a legit shooter in the mid-range. He's become like more aggressive in the isolations. In the next game, he took Claxton, just backed him down, goes for a dunk twice. Same with the Dayron Sharp, he just took him off the dribble. So you can see those kind of growth where he's looking to be a scorer much more a lot of the time on the offense.
That play, it was my roommate's a big Nets fan, so they're always on in our house. And I saw the play he had against Claxton, and I did a double take because he's always had that kind of physicality, but it feels like he hasn't always had the confidence to go to it. And that was sort of eye-opening. Say, oh, he's doing that now. And granted, I don't know if he can move Mitchell Robinson the same way, but it is a scary proposition having to face him in the playoffs. And that mid-range game, I mean, I thought it was huge in that series. Just to like the further teams can move Mitchell Robinson away from the basket, the more success they're going to have, because funneling bodies to him is the core of the Knicks' entire defense. And if you can get him to take a couple steps forward, that is huge. So that being said, John,
happened in the Memphis game this season because the offense around Bam, they always have him at the top, but then the Memphis adjusted by having Jaren Jackson and Tillman around the paint. Bam just said, "Okay, I'll have that jump shot every time." He just pulled up, he knocked out like 2 or 3, and now they have to step up. So I think that range definitely helps them.
And look, we saw the Celtics twice now torture the Knicks with Porzingis. Obviously, Bam is not that level of shooter yet, but it does open up a whole lot of space that otherwise wouldn't be there. And without that, like if Bam was totally rim bound, I would actually have a lot of confidence in the Knicks' ability to guard the Heat. But all that being said, John, let's before we say keys to the matchup, I just because I know you watch this stuff so closely, what's something that you've just kind of gone under the radar nationally that you as someone who's probably watching all these games twice, or as Tom Thibodeau says when he wants to critique reporters, like, I watched the game 3 times. What's something you've really enjoyed that's kind of going under the radar about this Heat season?
I was going to say Duncan Robinson, but he's gotten love from Zach Lowe, so that doesn't count because he's got national media love now. I haven't seen Haywood Highsmith love. He's another undrafted guy that they just found. I think they found him 2 years ago. Last year he played minimal role, and then now he's a starter, and he's pretty good at it. I think he has one of the highest net ratings on the team with them. I haven't seen much talk about what he's been doing. He was an offensive liability last year with only knocking down corner shots, and that's why they couldn't play him as much. Now he's got confidence to lift up, shake, like keep going around the perimeter as well, just knocking down threes. That's like in the preseason where he just knocked down deep from the hush mark. Like that's the key to his game that just expanded. There was a tweeted one from the Bulls game where he waved off Butler to go into a post up. So they literally run a possession for a post up for Haywood. Similar to like a PJ Tucker role as well, where he's a handoff guy and he's able to take those handoffs. Haywood's improvement for the last 2-3 seasons has been huge. But outside of the Heat media, I haven't seen no talks about him. I don't think people know that the starting four for the Heat is Haywood Highsmith.
All right, well, excited to see what he'll do against the Knicks. To that point, I feel like over the last 2 years, these teams have just played great regular season matchups and almost nothing but it. And it feels like I could see Knicks Heat being a first round series, like 4-5 type deal this year. It obviously, the Cavs will have something to say about that. The Bucks, the Sixers, we'll see how that all shakes out. There could always be an injury. That being said, it feels like every single one of these games is going to have a little bit of added importance, not just because of the playoffs last year, but because one game might decide which team has home court advantage in a first round series and which team doesn't. That being said, what are you looking out for this one? And do you think Miami, obviously they are, as their court will tell you, the grittiest, toughest, strongest MFers out there, but are they going to put a little extra importance on this game? And is there any like little thing you're looking out for in terms of deciding this matchup?
I want to see Bam versus Randle again. So I remember in the playoffs there were a couple of possessions where Randle just struggled to shoot over him.
Yeah.
I want to see how they guard Brunson again, because he cooked them in that series. He just got to wherever spot he wants. I think last year he wasn't that great of a pull-up shooter. Can't remember if that checks out, but like you say, he improved this year where he's at a volume just scoring a lot. So I wonder to see if they just adjust to that or just dare him to shoot again. Outside of that, I want to see that Robinson matchup as well, because I keep seeing a lot of Knicks fans talk about Robinson a lot. I saw a post, someone had Robinson as on the defensive player of the year, like top 5 ahead of Bam. I want to see if that actually checks out, see if that's actually real. Yeah, but it should be a good matchup considering they lost in 6, and it wasn't really that competitive then.
Yeah, I think that I would not personally have him ahead of Bam, given what Bam's done year over year, but I would tell you it's real. Almost no matter what happens in this game, he's been incredible this year, and his offensive rebounding, unquestioned. There was a point like 8 games into the season where he would have been like 17th amongst all teams in offensive rebounding. I have to double check that. He's not far off of the 30th team right now. So he's a one-man army on that side of the court, one-man army defensively. I'm with you on Brunson. I got to imagine Spo, while not trying to fully reveal his theoretical playoff strategy, is going to throw some new wrinkles in there. And Brunson has not been nearly as good from 2-point range this year. In fact, he's shooting like, I think 5% better from 3 than 2-point range this year, which is crazy for someone who was hyper efficient there last year. It seems like that's starting to click a little bit. He looks to be more comfortable getting to the wing, shooting from the wing, getting to the paint, throwing up those floaters that were just absolutely unguardable last year. But the biggest thing is how much he can stretch Miami's defense and how much they respect him, because as of now, you still see teams are letting him walk in to those 25 footers, and he's hitting them over and over again. I'm curious if maybe Spoelstra, who's just more on top of things than most coaches, if he makes that adjustment a little bit earlier than other teams would. And then Randle, I think this is a huge game for Julius Randle, because he had that epic, like one of his best games as a Knick came the second to last game of the season against the Heat, where he hit the game winner in Miami.
That shot, sorry? I think, that shot, didn't he?
So that was after he tried to fumble the ball away about 3 different times. One of my good friends, who's a big Heat fan, that was his first ever Heat game in Miami, and he traveled from New York to go to it. So you got to imagine, I was sending him a lot of texts after that one. But and then obviously he totally struggled in the playoffs again on a bad ankle. Hard to tell how much of it was that versus just the Heat being great at defending him versus Randle's just continual playoff struggles. But I think I'm with you. If there's one thing I'm watching in this one, it's can Julius Randle continue his recent stretch of great play, and can he do so against like probably the guy in the league most equipped to lock him down in Bam Adebayo?
Got because I'm just looking at some of the Knicks that are looking a bit worrying for the Heat. The offensive rebound is a big one, because I see that they're first in rebounding percentage on offense. The Heat have usually been a top 5 team. Like, despite looking at the raw rebounding numbers, they've been elite at defensive rebounding percentage. But that's dropped off this year as well. Even in this win streak, I think they were at 16th. So that's not looking good against this kind of team. And then your turnover percentage, that's locked down. You don't turn over the ball. And the Heat generate a lot of the offense through turnovers. So I want to see who's going to win that battle. Whether it will be Heat just forcing you to lock turnovers. I'm not sure how they did in the past. But I think rebounding and forcing turnovers will be a fun matchup to see.
Yeah, look, that's the that's the core of the Knicks offense, right? Even like they're still, even with Jalen Brunson cooking, they're like, I haven't checked the updated stats, but as of a week ago, they were far and away the worst shooting team at the rim in the NBA. They're still like a pretty poor shooting team, even if their 3-point shooting has been excellent this year, but they hit just enough threes. They don't turn it over. They get tons of rebounds. And last year, to me, that was the biggest difference between the Cavs series and the Heat series. Mitch went from basically being this version of him where he looks like one of the more dominant offensive rebounders, not in the league currently, but in NBA history. Bam just erased that in the postseason. So I'm curious too if that changes. But John Jablonka, I really appreciate you taking the time today. Before I let you go, can you just tell everyone one final time where they can find you on Twitter? For those of you watching on YouTube, his handle is on the screen, but where they can find your work on Twitter and where they can find all your great work covering the Miami Heat.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter on John Jablonka _. You can find most of my work at MiamiHeatBeat.com. A lot of my articles and threads, because I do a lot of work on just primarily through threads. All of that is on my Twitter LinkedIn link page.
John, you did an incredible job educating me on the Heat last year, and it was reading those threads, so I encourage people to check them out. And I hope we get the opportunity to do it again during a potential matchup. Hopefully a different outcome this time around. I'm going to end the show before you can contradict that. But he's John. I'm Gavin. We will talk to you very soon on Locked On Knicks.